What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we are going to open up some Stan Lee signed books and talk about how signatures impact the prices of comics. Stay tuned. Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. So I've got 3 books in here, all signed by Stan Lee. Paid about $2,700 for them. So they aren't small books. They're definitely keys with his signature. And I thought it would also be interesting to talk about how signatures impact the price of books. And because I definitely get questions about things like pricing, that kind of thing. And signatures are tricky. So I thought, open these books, and we talk about some of those ways that signatures impact books and how you can actually price books with signatures. So with that, we'll get into this. And I've mentioned this a number of times. I don't tend to buy signature series books very often. When I do, they generally tend to be Stan Lee signed books. And part of that is just that's definitely the signature that has the most value out of any of the signatures out there. Even though he signed a ton of stuff, Stan Lee signatures carry the most value out of anything that you're generally going to come across. A lot of packing peanuts in here. So this is a seller that I've bought books from in the past, and if you want to check them out, they are an awesome dealer. This is New Force Comics, and they just have, I don't buy too much from them very often because their books are so big, like it's like huge keys that you see posted on their Instagram, and so I don't have the 40 or 50 grand for the AF-15s and that kind of thing that get posted there, but it's always fun to look at them, so I definitely recommend checking them out. They're on Instagram as well. So like I said, I picked up 3 books. First book here is probably the biggest book of the 3, and I'll talk about why I say that a little bit later. But this is Captain America number 100, 7.5. You can see it's got his signature right there on the shield, which I think is a really cool signature placement. And then you can also see this one was signed quite a few years ago. It's got this older label. You can tell pretty quickly when it's these older ones because they're kind of cloudy. The plastic isn't as clear as the plastic they use right today. So you can see the label looks a little cloudy, but you can see it was signed in 2012. So I'll definitely take a look at it and see if I think there's any opportunity that it could improve with like a press or anything like that. Now the next book is this is a book that I really like right now. I have been picking this book up when I get the chance to because I think it is just a great book to have. And this is Marvel Premiere number 15, which is the first appearance of Iron Fist, also in a 7.5. And you can see it's got Stan Lee's signature right on, Iron Fist on the front. It's not quite as clean of a signature on this one. This was signed in 2016, which you can see the difference here between these labels. So you see that how this one is significantly brighter than the other label, and so that's just kind of the way that you can quickly identify that it's one of the older labels. This isn't the really old ones. The really old ones look completely different. But I have been picking up this book when I get the opportunity to because there have been rumors that there's going to be a Power Man and Iron Fist show. So Power Man is Luke Cage, which is why I have a number of copies of Hero for Hire number 1 because I've been picking up that book. And then this is obviously Iron Fist, and so they could be bringing them back for some type of Disney Plus show or something, so I think that this is a good book to pick up with that potential. And then the last book here is another older signed book. This is from 2013 when it got signed, and this is Hulk number 182. It's pretty high grade, 9.0. You can see the signature right here. This one is a little better signature, a little more like what you expect to see with Stan Lee. Like the Iron Fist one's it's kind of a little weird for this signature, but they're witness, so you know that they're correct. And this book, it's no question why you picked this book up. This is the 3rd time that you see Wolverine in a comic. First time is his first cameo in Hulk 180. Second time is the first full appearance in 181. And this is considered the second cameo appearance in 182. He's on the first page and then he's gone for the rest of the story. And then you also have, these very, very key villains, Hammer and Anvil, as their first appearance. So, really important book for that. But the Wolverine thing is the big thing. And so having a Stan Lee signed book where it's one of Wolverine's early appearances is a pretty big deal. So I thought that was another great book to pick up. They had a number of Stan Lee signed books. These were just the three that I decided to purchase. And so with that, I'll just briefly talk about why I think each one of these is important to have his signature on. And so, like I mentioned, Hulk 182, Wolverine, one of the most popular characters of all time. And so getting his signature on one of his early appearances is just a big deal. Then we've got Iron Fist, which just for the spec purposes of Iron Fist, then having that Stan Lee signature just adds something extra to that book. And the reason why I think this book is the most important to have his signature on, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but he actually did the story for this. So you can see Stan Lee's story. So he actually worked on this book, which to me makes that very important. This is also Captain America 100, if you're not aware, is the first self-titled issue of the Silver Age for him. So it's very similar to Iron Man #1 or Submariner #1 or Hulk 102. Each one of those are their first issues of their series. It's too bad they didn't start at issue 1 like Iron Man and Submariner. I think that would have helped out the book a lot, even more than what it does today. But this is that first issue, which I think is a big deal to have his signature on that. Also a great signature placement on the shield. With that, let's talk about assessing the value of a signature. Some of the things that you can look for, because signatures are pretty tricky. Now, these are just guidelines that I follow. There are no firm rules. There's nothing that says you have to charge this amount or that amount for a signature, but these are just some general rules to help when you're dealing with books that are signed like this. So one thing to be aware of right off the bat is that there are some people that will never buy a signed book. They see a signature as damage to that book and they don't want to have anything to do with it. So you've got to be aware of that first, that when you are getting a book signed, if your goal is to sell that book eventually, if you're buying a signed book to sell, it does decrease the market, the number of people that are going to potentially be interested in that book. So just something to be aware of, that you may end up holding that book a little longer than you would if the book was unsigned. Doesn't mean it doesn't carry more value. Similar to something like a unique book like a Mark Jewelers insert that you might have, or a newsstand variant or Canadian newsstand. Those things all add value to the book, but you have a smaller market that desires them, and so then it might take you a little bit longer to sell that book. So there are lots of things to consider with a signed book. The first thing, is it a witness signature? Is it a verified signature? Or is there no verification at all with that book? With a witness signature, it looks like what I was just showing here. With a CGC case, it's going to be a yellow label, and it's going to say, who it was signed by, and they had somebody that actually witnessed them sign this book. Now, CBCS also has witnessed signatures, and so they will also be yellow labels. But the other thing you can see with CBCS is they have a verified signature program where if they didn't have somebody witness it, they can look at that signature and determine if it's authentic, and they will say it's a verified signature. Now, it used to be that this would be a red label. So if you saw a red label book for CBCS, that was a verified signature. People didn't like the red labels, and so they eventually changed that to a yellow label so it looks just like their witness signatures, but it says verified on it. Now, the other thing that you could have is if it's not verified at all. So if you sent in, say, this book to CGC and it hadn't been witnessed, they would usually put on the notes signed by Stan Lee or something like that, where like Stan Lee would be in parentheses, so it's like text, but it would not be yellow, it would be a green label typically. Could potentially be a blue label. If it's a low grade book, then that signature isn't going to lower the grade, and so that's how you can get a blue label book with a signature on it. But if it's a higher grade book, say like this, like a 7.5, if you sent this in, you'd probably get like a 5.0, and it'd be a 5.0 blue label because of the signature on there, so it would lower the grade. So they'd either do a 5.0 blue label, or you might get a green 7.5. And so there are lots of ways that you can see that, but the way that people are really going to trust that it's a signed book by that person is with that yellow label, or with CBCS and the older ones, the red label. Now the next thing that's important is the location of that signature. You can have signatures in some pretty crappy locations. I've had a book before. It was a Fantastic Four 67 that was also signed by Stan Lee, but he had signed it in a place where you could barely even read the signature. I didn't like that location, whereas this one, I love the location of the signature. I think it's awesome that he signed the shield. I think that is a really good location for this. I've seen it also signed in this white area here, and that looks pretty nice, but I really like this location. I do also like the ones where he signs on the title. I think that looks nice, because sometimes he'll sign like right over the face of characters, and I think that's something that is a little worse. So maybe somebody isn't going to like that as much because it's really impacting the art on the cover. Now, some people do like it when you have a signature that blends into the book. I had a Moon Knight book that was signed, and it blended in really, really well with the cover. And so I thought that one was actually pretty cool, the way that one was signed. And another one I have here, where you can see cool ways that books get signed, is this Hulk 340. And this one is signed 4 times. And you can see that Romita here and Richard Parker signed on the blades, which I think is such a cool way to sign this book. So there are lots of ways that people can sign these, and some are more desirable visually than others. And so that can definitely have an impact a little bit on the value, but also on how easy it is to sell that book. Now, the next one is the quality of the signature itself. And you saw that just with the books that I was showing here, where this one, it's kind of tough to see that that's Stan Lee's signature. It's a little bit messy, and so I would say that's maybe a lower quality signature, whereas this one here, it's a lot easier for me to see that that's Stan Lee's signature. It looks more like his traditional signature, and so it's just something where it's a little more clear, and that could be something that's more desirable to people when they're purchasing that book. The other thing with signatures is that I think a very good example is how Todd McFarlane signs his books now. So he used to always spell out Todd. You know, you'd get Todd McFarlane, it would be pretty clear. Now he does the T a lot of the time. You know, it's just so he can sign it faster. And so that's maybe a little less desirable of a signature. Sometimes they also aren't very clear. I snapped a picture of one that I saw recently, and I was talking about this one with a friend, where it's really funny. It looks like Tord McFarlamp. And so I think like some of the stuff like that, where sometimes you get them where they're clear, sometimes you don't, and that can have at least an impact, maybe not so much on the value, but on the desirability. So again, one of those things where it's how long are you going to be holding on to that book if you're trying to sell it, and how much do you like the way it looks if you're presenting it in your own house, whatever you're doing with the book. Now the next thing that can add value and can become a little complex with books is multiple signatures. Now all these Stan Lee books just signed by Stan Lee, so it's pretty straightforward, but that's why the other reason I brought this one here is that this is a quadruple signed book. And so that's something that can make it a little more complicated with signatures, and especially when it's a higher grade book. So this one being a 9.6, because one of the things that can happen as you get more and more signatures, it's more people handling it, more likely that that book is going to get damaged, and so you're not going to maintain that high grade. And so you might see an increase in value in that book with more signatures if you can retain the high grade more than what you would get if you were just adding the signatures together, where the total is worth more than the parts. And so that's something to really consider when you've got high grade books that have a bunch of signatures on it, and why people sometimes get really concerned when they're sending in 9.8s to get signed, because there is definitely a possibility that that book will not come back a 9.8 after it's signed, with whoever was handling it, going through the re-encapsulation process and all of that. So multiple signatures is also something to really look into when you're evaluating these books. Now, I don't have any examples of this next one, but the other type could be if you have a remark or some type of sketch on the cover. And so that's something that can be a little more tricky, because now you've got some unique artwork that artist has added to the cover, and that can often add additional value to that book. So something to be aware of, if you've got sketches on the cover, that's definitely something where that can be more value to the book beyond just the signature itself. Now, I did mention this next piece that I think is important with this Captain America 100, and this is one of the most important parts for me personally. I really like when the person who signed the book worked on the book. I think that's important. I'm not so much into the just tons of signatures on a book just for the sake of a bunch of signatures. I like it when they have the actual people that worked on the book signing the book. I think that's cool. And while Stan Lee was at Marvel during all these other books, so you could say he's associated with Marvel during that time, this is one where he was actually working on it. So to me, that makes it just a little more important with that signature for that book. Now, the next thing is the actual significance of the book. So signatures will definitely add value. If Stan Lee signs any book, it'll definitely add value regardless. But if it's a more important book, that signature adds more and more value. So for example, if you see some of the original books that he worked on for Marvel, where you're talking about the early superhero stuff like Fantastic Four 1, X-Men 1, a Stan Lee signature will often add $1,000 or more to the value of that book, sometimes quite a bit more than that. Whereas if he signs just some, say random Spider-Man book, maybe it adds $100. So it's one of those things where you really do have to consider how important that book is to how much value that signature is going to add to it. Now the last thing, this ties a little bit back to what I was mentioning with the Hulk 340, and that's the grade of the book. And so it doesn't matter quite as much when you're talking about older Silver Age books, but with modern books, maintaining that high grade with the signatures really does make quite a bit of difference in the value of the book. So you do tend to want to try to get the 9.6, 9.8, that kind of thing with moderns. Older books, definitely not nearly as important just because there aren't as many of those really high grade books anyway. The signature is playing a much bigger role there than the actual grade of the book. Now let's talk about pricing. So actually pricing these books with signatures on them. And so the first place to start is definitely a pricing service, because you want to figure out what the value of that book is without the signature, because that should be your baseline. You should generally consider that if there's a signature on that book, it will add some value to that book. It might not be much depending on who signed it, but some value to that book is added with that signature. So if you can determine that original baseline value, you can work from there. Now, there are other sites that can help you a little more with signatures and the values. So for example, Go Collect and GPA both provide prices of signed books. And so with Go Collect, you can go into their extra filters and you can search for just signed books, and it'll give you results for signed books. But the tricky thing with signatures is they don't sell as often. You have so much variety. Like you could have this book that's signed by these 4 people or 3 people or 1 person or 1 of each, and so you can have so much variety that it can be a little tough to evaluate the value of a book based on a prior sale, but it's at least something that gives you a decent starting point. GPA actually breaks it down by the actual signature that's on each one, so they'll have a different listing for every different variation, but then you might only have 1 sold listing in the last 5 years, and you can't value a book off of that. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, you can try, but there's just when there's that little of data, you're more likely to get a better, more accurate answer just going off the unsigned books, because then you're going to have at least more recent sales data. Now for adding that value of the signature to the book, a great place to start is how much did it actually cost to get the book signed. Now you might not be able to get the full value of what you spent to get that book signed out of your book when you sell it. I mean, that's something you have to accept. If you're getting a book signed and you're spending $150 for that signature, you may not add $150 in value to that book. So like Frank Miller's signature is very expensive to get, and you may not get all that money out of that book if it's signed. So definitely something to consider if you're looking at getting books signed to sell. The value might not be there for that purpose. Now it might make it a little more desirable, something like that, so maybe it sells faster, but like I said, usually that's not the case. If it's signed, there's generally less demand for the book because you're eliminating that set of people that don't want signed books. Now another thing to really consider is if the person is still signing. So in the case with Stan Lee, since he has passed away, he's obviously not signing any more books. But you also have some people like Peter Laird with TMNT who really doesn't sign books anymore. And so when you have that, you have no more new inventory of signed books coming onto the market. And so that can be something to look for for longer term value increases in books that are signed. Whereas if you've got something like Chris Claremont or Todd McFarlane, who are signing tons and tons of books, there are more books just about every day that are coming out that are signed, and so that's maybe a slightly different story than books that are signed by someone like Stan Lee or Jack Kirby. Now, when it's coming to adding that value to the book, the most important thing is definitely the person that's signing it. And so I'd say a good way to go is just you can kind of put the different artists and authors into tiers and get a general idea about how much value they'll add to that book. So for Stan Lee, if it's a key issue, I would generally say anywhere from $400 to $1,000 are added in value to that book. And so for this book, for example, I would easily say somewhere from the $600 to $800 range added for this signature. One, because it's on a key issue, an important issue that he worked on. It's good signature placement, and it's a pretty clear signature. And so I think that's very important for this one. Whereas, say, Hulk 182, he didn't work on this book. Maybe this adds $500. Maybe it doesn't add quite as much to the value of that book because he didn't actually work on this one. It's still a very important book, and so you still, I think, definitely get a significant amount of value from a signature on this book, but maybe not as much as you would get on a key issue that he worked on. And then this last one here, I think this one might be, in my mind, the one that adds the least, maybe around $400 for this one, because it's still a key issue, but he didn't work on it, and it's not as popular of a character. I mean, you can't put Iron Fist and Wolverine in the same category, and so that's kind of how I look at these when I'm evaluating that for key issues, going from about $400 to $800 with these. But if I had something like an X-Men 1, I would say maybe $1,000 or $2,000 is added to the value of that book. Now, if it was just some random book, I would say anywhere from $100 to $150 for that signature. Especially if it's something like Spider-Man, something that's at least associated with a creation that he made. Now, the next tier of signatures I would say would include people like Frank Miller, Todd McFarlane, Neil Adams, Chris Claremont, and I'd say their signatures generally are going to add around $100 to that book. And so if you look at the universal price of the book, so if say this was a blue label of X-Men 101, something like that, signed by Chris Claremont, maybe it adds $100 or $150 to the value of that book. So that's a key book, one that he worked on, but he's still signing a lot of books. You could still get his signature, and so I think that puts a little bit of a cap on the value of that. And so you're going to get more like what it costs to get the book signed. Next tier down maybe, and I'm not trying to put down any authors or artists or anything like that. It's just, this is just what I've seen with what type of value gets added to books that are signed. So you maybe say somebody like Bernie Wrightson, John Romita Sr., Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, adds anywhere from maybe $50 to $100 when that book is getting signed. So that's a kind of a quick and easy way how you can determine, what tier you kind of place somebody in terms of their importance in the comic world and the comic universe. And you can get anywhere from around $50 to $100 to around $1,000. I would say that the biggest combination is probably Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. If you can get a book that has both of those signatures on it, that is a huge deal, especially for early books, like early X-Men, early Fantastic Four, that kind of thing. If you can have both their signatures on there, that's like the pinnacle of signatures on books. Now, there are plenty of other people that are signing books out there, and I would say they can add anywhere from about $0 to $50. There are definitely signatures that may not add much, if any, value to the book. That's not necessarily the purpose of getting a book signed. It's it's an author or an artist that you like, and you want to have them sign this book for you, and so it's not always about just adding value to the book. But I would say there are a lot of authors and a lot of artists that would be in the $0 to $50 range. But then as you like I said, as you get up to bigger and bigger artists, bigger and bigger authors, then you can get up into that $100, $400, $1,000 range when you're looking at the value added with that signature for that book. All right, so I hope this was helpful, give you some ideas about different things to consider when you're either getting a book signed or when you're picking up a signed book, looking for signed books, and how to evaluate those books and potentially price those books and see how much that signature adds to the value of that book. If you thought this video was useful, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. I've got more videos over here if you'd like to watch some of those, and the subscription button is right here if you'd like to subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.